Welcome back. We are live again from CanJam SoCal 2022, and I have the one and only Dan Clark with me and his brand new Expanse. So we're excited to have you here. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
You're always fantastic to have with us. And so we're going to hear about the Expanse. I gotta preface this. So I had maybe 20 minutes this morning before the room started to fill up, and one of my top priorities was hearing this headphone. And I have to tell you, in the limited time I've had it, my initial impressions are that this is the best Dan Clark headphone I have ever heard. And I've liked many of Dan's headphones, so that's seriously something. So I'm looking forward to getting some more review time with this, but this is an incredible sounding headphone. It's also technologically extremely advanced and done in a way that only you do things at a high level engineering. And it's just beautiful, and it's so comfortable. So tell us a little bit about this beauty that you have made.
Well, the Expanse is based on our Stealth headphone platform. It uses a driver that's based on Stealth but significantly retuned. And it also incorporates the what we call our AMTS, or Acoustic Metamaterial tuning system. And the AMTS is probably the most important part of the system, in that, as most people are familiar with, when you listen to music in a stadium or a club or your home, bass frequency response changes significantly as you move throughout the room. And that happens because there are big standing waves that occur where you get both reinforcement and increasing bass, and destructive reinforcement where the bass goes away. And so that's why when you walk through a nightclub, you might find that some spots on the dance floor just have way more bump than others do.
Right.
Well, the same thing happens in your headphone, except that it's happening in the very small space around your ear. And those high frequency standing waves make cymbals and strings sound sometimes sharp or listless or even synthetic on headphones.
Right.
And what AMTS does is it allows the sound to come from the driver into the cavity around your ear, but then when the sound wave reflects off your head and back into the towards the driver, it absorbs the energy that's being reflected, so that it effectively makes, if you want to think of it this way, it makes the room disappear. So it's kind of like if you were able to actually set up an acoustically perfect set of speakers in an outdoor space that had absolutely no reflections, it would sound very, very different from a room. And that's what we've done with the headphone. And it's pretty neat because it allows the top end in particular to sound very organic and complete and lively and lifelike without ever getting bright or edgy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. So at home in my speaker room, when I listen to speakers a lot, the difference of that room has taken honestly 2 years to get where it's at, and it's been through treating the walls, the floors, bass traps attached to the ceiling. I mean, just
signal processing.
Yes, I mean, so that it's, to me, everything you just said translates in my mind, but you're doing it with AMT technology and headphones to create that same amazing listening experience, which is cool.
And the other part of the equation at the opposite end of the spectrum is, while it's common for dynamic headphones to have a rising bass response that would allow you to project more bass impact and would follow what's called the Harman curve a little more closely. And the Harman curve is kind of a statistically derived way of representing what an average person would consider to be a smooth sounding balanced headphone. Similar to a perfect, a smooth sounding speaker in a well done room. And so that response is based on how you perceive the tonality of the headphone compared to what we're used to, which is live speakers or PA systems, etc.
Yep.
And normally in planar magnetic and electrostatic headphones, below the mid-range or below about 1,000 hertz, they tend to measure flat like a ruler down to the bass frequencies. And what we've done is we've been able to sculpt it so that the bass response rises at the lower frequencies without intruding into the mid-range, so that you get very nicely balanced vocals, especially male vocals. Acoustic guitar, electric guitar will sound right, but when the bass comes on, the bass really sounds like you're just in a really fun, very well-tuned room or club or outdoor venue.
I actually listened to Enter the Sandman this morning on it, and I was really impressed with the bass from these and just the overall vibe I was getting from that sound. And I was on one of Justin's flagship amps, tube amps, and so I was just a really pleasing experience, and that's one of the songs that came up. And I really enjoy the bass on these quite a bit. So it's, yeah, my initial thoughts on this, I'll say it again, I think this is your best headphone you've ever made, and I'm really excited to spend more time with it. Take us through some of these beautiful design elements, because one thing I love about your headphones, one, you prioritize comfort, and to me, there's only really a couple manufacturers that do that enough, and you're one of the best at that. So to me, I'll be honest, I love speakers as much as I do headphones, but if I have the chance, I might go to speakers first because I can put my daughter next to me or whatever. But for me, the comfort thing has to happen, because to escape into music and forget that you're wearing a set of headphones, they have to be comfortable. And you do that so well, both with your, the headband design, the pads are super comfortable, the way they shape to the ear, it's impeccable. So take us through some of the designs, similar to the Stealth, but we have some new things for the design of the cups, which, these are spectacular. I've never seen anything like it, right? Beautiful. So take us through some of those elements and the thoughts behind them, if you don't mind.
Sure. I guess the first thing would be to actually focus on the overall teardrop shape of the headphone. And while there are headphones that have been put on the market before that have some kind of ovalness to it, this one's actually very specifically constructed. And I'll see if I can orient so that it's visible on the camera. You can actually adjust the seating of the headphone anywhere from having the headband fairly forward on the head so that the headphone comes down behind your jaw.
Yes.
To where the headphone's fitted toward the back of the head so that the headphone comes forward on the jaw. And that way it gives you the flexibility to get a really good seal whether or not you have a sharp jaw or a wide neck, because seal is very important to get good bass response.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so no matter which way you rotate it, it will sound about the same because of the way it's positioned on your head. The other thing that we did that I think contributed a ton to the comfort was switching to this new self-adjusting strap.
I love that.
And it actually was an amazingly hard project to get the elasticity right, because if you get it wrong, on half the people, the headphone will just go whoop and slide down around your neck.
Sure.
And on the other half, it'll go whoop and it'll try to go up here.
Right.
So we managed to strike the balance where the spring force and the resistance of the materials was done just right, and it went through a fairly exhaustive selection process to get the right materials. And we also picked a really nice, beautiful leather of the type of quality that you would expect on like a really high-end motorcycle saddlebag.
Absolutely.
And then we, taking some design cues from the automotive industry, I think it was actually some nice Aston Martin seats that we really liked the stitching on. We put in this really nice quilted stitch pattern where even for people who might have thinning hair, for example, it allows airflow to happen through the headband so you don't get heat buildup underneath the headband and therefore sweat.
Yeah, and it looks beautiful too.
And it's got a nice look to it and a nice, it gives a soft feel to it, even though the headband itself is made of a firm leather. We also took a lot of effort. We chose a synthetic suede material to make the mating surface to your face, because it gives a nice, doesn't get wet kind of feel to it, even if you live in a humid climate. And as you say, we focus on comfort. We have what I call the 8-hour rule, which is if I can't wear the headphone for pretty much 8 hours without wanting to rip it off my head and throw it through the window,
it doesn't pass.
Then it's not ready.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I love that. Everybody should do that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way the first time I bought a high-end headphone before I started the company about 12 years ago. And the headphone probably weighed 560 grams or 600 grams. And the way it sat on my head just made a burning sensation on the crown of my head.
Right.
And then where it clamped on my head, it was like a vice. And so either the top of my head would start burning or my ears would start burning after about 20 minutes. And that was literally the limit I could listen to this, one of the early $1,000 plus headphones when, the market was very different. And it was like, well, that was a wasted $1,000 because I can't wear the headphone.
Right. The most important thing. Yeah.
It's like, well, that defeats the purpose. So that was where the emphasis on comfort came from. One of our design features that we really like is the titanium alloy headband as well, because it delivers a very uniform spring force. So whether your head is narrow or wide, it doesn't really change the clamp all that much.
Yeah.
It's also ultra light and it's really strong, so you can torque it or drop it and it will never deform.
And you can pack this up tiny too. I mean, just like
stealth,
I just love
they're
that.
travel friendly.
I just love that.
Yeah,
That's
it comes
fantastic.
with a cute little case, which we don't have here, so it's easy to drop in the backpack.
Sure.
The other thing you asked about was the design cues for the grill, and I'll try to hold that a little closer to maybe make it a little more visible. It's interesting always doing it in reverse.
I know, it's weird. And when we look over here, it's because I have a big monitor, so we're trying to see hopefully what you guys can see.
So the actual impetus for looking at these kind of more organic designs is mirrored from technology we used when we started designing these headbands, and that was it's called generative design. And generative design kind of uses cues that you find in biological systems like plants or bones, and the concept is that a lot of these structures have been, through the process of millions or billions of years of evolution, become very efficient in how they use space and deliver strength.
Right.
And they also sometimes just make for really interesting aesthetic designs. So in this instance, it helped us make a headband gimbal design that was lighter without sacrificing strength. In this case, I liken it to looking at like the cross section of a plant stem.
Yeah,
where you
that
see
makes
this
total sense,
texture of different cells next to each other of varying pitch and geometry.
Right.
And we felt it really just gave the headphone a really distinctive and a pleasing and unusual look. The generative design wasn't actually used to create this. Instead, what we did was a combination of mathematical functions that we overlaid on top of each other to create that pattern.
Cool.
It's almost like a digital fingerprint, because if you don't have the exact math functions, you'll never be able to reproduce that pattern.
Yeah, I love it. I think it looks sweet. The other thing I noticed too on listening just briefly this morning, these actually do a better job than, I can't even think of another open back at keeping some of the outside world out, which is also unique to and which is great, especially for here, right? Because CanJam, as we know, is, especially in this room, you can hear, if you're watching this video, you hear people talking live. I mean, there's
always the person playing Michael Jackson's Thriller at 196 decibels.
You're blowing their eardrums out. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these actually do...
Why is it always Thriller? Inquiring minds want to know. Why is it always Thriller?
That's a good question, actually. These, I noticed, keep the sound, out a little bit. What is going on there? How is that happening?
That is part of the design of the drivers.
Okay.
And I won't go into too much detail on it, but it is also part of the AMTS system and related to that.
Awesome.
So the neat thing is that it gives you a degree of isolation that you might expect from a closed back that's not marketing itself as a well-isolating closed back.
Right.
But it has all the advantages of an open
back
for the dynamics and the soundstage.
I love that. Well, especially because when I'm listening a lot of times, right, I have two listening modes. When I'm reviewing, or if I'm listening to my speakers, or if I'm at my desk just working on maybe some photography projects, and then I'm just enjoying while working. But when I'm working on photography projects, I'm using hard drives. Sometimes, there's a little noise that can output when I'm working. These might handle some of that, which is kind of cool. So that to me, but I still would rather hear open backs than closed backs. So that's just my preference. I prefer open back headphones. So these are going to be a real sweet spot, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, we've had a great response at this show. It's like normally people come by and some people will say, "Oh, I like this," and some people say, "I don't like this." I don't think I've had a negative comment, and I think that's the first time that I've ever released a headphone that, so far, everybody I've spoken to enjoyed.
That's a big congratulations moment, though, because that's probably what all manufacturers are striving for, and designers especially.
That's nice when you can get it.
Yes, right? And, I mean, so kudos to you. You guys have done exceptional with this headphone, and I'm looking forward to getting more time with it for sure. Let's see here. We probably have some questions, so let's go look here.
Sure.
It says, Christopher says, the blue trim looks even prettier than the red, and I think they both look gorgeous, so there's another compliment.
Thank you.
And then Sonic Visions asks, any chance of a vegan leather version of Expanse and Stealth in the future?
It's difficult. The ear pads are vegan ear pads, but the top strap, a couple things happen when you get into the synthetic materials. The first is that a lot of the synthetic protein leathers, for example, are sensitive to skin oils, and so particularly for people who have thinner hair
or like bald head, like
bald,
me.
Yeah, bald head,
bald guys.
What'll happen is that will age the material on the inside of the headband very quickly.
Right.
You know, because you tend to get more oil there than you do in this area around your face here.
Yep.
I think pretty much everybody's familiar with what it's like when you have the pleather or synthetic leather ear pads, where you know that there's that magic day when you take your headphone off and you have a circle of black gunk from your
cheap production headphones that I use for video production.
In fact, that was the exact.
This is the one.
That was the headphone that I first experienced the dreaded circle of peeling pleather on my face from.
Yeah.
You know, and they're known for that. You know, but that will happen here, and the head strap is a lot more expensive to manufacture than the ear pads.
Yeah.
On the ear pads, you know, we do use synthetics, and it is vegan materials. This suede has a tendency to last longer than the protein leather.
Right.
So we use that on the contact surface,
which is also
for comfort,
soft. Yeah.
and sweat mitigation.
Yep.
And then we use it on the outside for the aesthetics. And the nice thing about the synthetics is they do give us tighter tolerance for sewing.
Right.
Regular leather, the tolerances can be plus or minus 2 millimeters for doing a complex shape like this ear pad. And with the synthetics, the tolerance is plus or minus 1 millimeter. And for what we do, that's a mile.
Yeah.
You know, because the rest of our tolerances are measured in like 0.02 millimeter tolerances or 0.001 inches.
Rob Watts and I were talking about this yesterday morning. I don't know if you guys got to see that live stream with Rob, but he was giving props to Dan, and specifically we were talking about we were talking about how he loves the Stealth and how he's been listening to the Stealth and how he's excited to hear the Expanse. And then the second thing we were talking about is how we both love the way Dan's headphones sound with cord gear, because you have cord, I have cord. I'm a TT2 Hugo 2 owner. You're a TT2 M Scaler Hugo 2 owner, I believe.
Yeah, and a Mojo.
And a Mojo. So I mean, and
a Mojo soon, as soon as I can get one.
Right, and that's the other thing. He said they're selling out of them so fast. But Rob was like, I said, Rob, why? What is going on? Like, I know that Dan owns them, and I own them, and I hear this supreme synergy. And he said, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a voicing thing or anything like that. I think it's that we have the same mentality and technical engineering prowess to the way we do things, and because of those, you know, that high level detail, you know, getting everything just right, and in your cases, the measurement tolerances and getting that perfection, they just synergize so well together. So it was a huge props to you, you know, and vice versa. He was, you know, you guys are both kind of legends in your space, so it was pretty cool.
Thanks. Well, you know, I love the cord gear, and it is my kind of default go-to stuff. One of the things that they do that not every vendor does is they pay real attention to being able to drive low impedance loads. And you know, I can't tell you, it's like our planers are a lower impedance load, so they prefer amplifiers that can push more current, or a tube amplifier that has, for instance, a 16 or a 32 ohm tap, so you can get decent power coupling to the headphone.
100%.
One of the things that the cord folk do is they design stuff to current double as the load decreases by half. For the non-technical, basically, it means that a lot of headphone amplifiers are designed for high impedance headphones, like dynamic headphones, where the impedance might be 150 ohms or 300 ohms. When an amplifier has strong current delivery capability, when you cut the impedance of the headphone in half, say from 150 ohms to 75 ohms, the power should double.
Right.
If the power isn't doubling, then the amplifier is beginning to run out of current, and you'll hear that as like weak delivery of bass, etc.
Yep.
So like even the little Chord Mojo was designed so it would current double all the way down to 8 ohms, which that's starting to get into you could drive a small loudspeaker
Impressive,
with it territory.
Yep.
At least an efficient one.
Sure.
But the not many manufacturers do that, and that pays real dividends when you're dealing with a less efficient planer, like Stealth and the Expanse. They don't require a speaker amp to drive, but you do want to get an amplifier that has good current and good power level.
Yep.
And that just makes it an easy automatic fit.
Sure.
Then the way they handle their digital filtration and the way the DACs work.
Super impressive.
It just yields a really lifelike sound to me, and it just feels kind of in sync with what we try to accomplish as well. And so that is, I use a lot of their gear. I use a lot of shit gear. I have some Woo Audio stuff. I also have we have one of the Amps and Sounds in the office, the Nautilus.
Right? Yeah, Nautilus. That's a beauty too.
And I have even some old legacy Cavalli stuff that I still love. One of my favorite vintage amps is my Cavalli Liquid Glass, which is like the rare tube amp that has a hybrid output stage.
I think Jason loves that one too. Yeah.
It's just a lovely amp, and it has such a vibrant, lifelike sound to it, and it's a tube roller's geek dream. But the neat thing about it is that even though it's a tube-based amp, the distortion levels are
really low.
Yeah, they aren't pushing the best solid-state amps, but the signal-to-noise ratio and the distortion levels are such that it never becomes offensive. Awesome. And so I really enjoy it for that reason too.
Very good.
But that old Liquid Glass is unobtainium. I think they only made like 100 of them or something.
Yeah,
and nobody ever sells them.
Nobody's going to sell
Nobody sells them.
Or if they do, they're crazy. All right, let's see if we got. I think we have some other questions here. Dan, are you a speaker fan? If so, which speakers do you own or like? I think you do have speakers. We've talked about this personally, I think, before.
Yeah, well, I started my audio career designing loudspeakers, and did that as a consultant for a while. The most notable designs I did were for Platinum Audio after the original designer Phil Jones left. So we won a couple of awards with those. It was really neat working with some of the early metal cone drivers and figuring out how to make a 4.5-inch driver reach down to 36 hertz, but we did it, and still able to handle reasonable SPL.
Right.
Nowadays people have gotten better at stuff like that, so you can get surprisingly deep bass out of small drivers. I designed my own speakers. I have been working on some co-entry design horns based on the Danley Synergy horn technology. I use those. I made a set for festivals that we borrowed the design concepts from a gentleman named Art on DIY Audio who goes under Weltersys, and he made a lovely, very compact co-entrant horn. And what's unique about these Synergy or co-entrant horns is that they're designed so that there's only one mouth for all the drivers. And if you do it right, it's the only technology where you can have a multi-way speaker that can actually pass an impulse response as an impulse response.
Wow.
Very neat stuff.
That's cool.
And I've been working on a version of that for the house that we're designing ourselves from the ground up. Because, the one we made for festivals works really well.
It was a hit, so yeah.
We brought it to Burning Man this year. And
love it.
The art car it was supposed to be on kind of didn't show up. We ended up putting it on, found a camp that some friends of ours from San Diego were running and set it up so that they could completely violate the sound ordinances in their neighborhood at the burn.
And you know what? That's part of the burn, man. I don't know how many times I've just you're trying to sleep and then you just hear this vibrant bass line across. You're like, why am I sleeping? I got other things I could be doing. And then you get out of your tent or your trailer and you're like, all right, let's go to the music.
or worse, when you're camped in between 4 sound camps and it sounds like you're basically next to a 30-foot tall washing machine filled with pots and pans.
Yeah, everything's bouncing off of each other. You're like, oh gosh, that's funny. Well, that's cool. So so he is into speakers. That was a great question. Thank you. We have the last Rhino. What's up, buddy? How are you? Good to see you. Dan, I really like your passion and sublime engineering. It's obvious how much time you spend to come up with these products, but if I'm asking a question about a criticism I often hear, have you heard about the the DCA headphones lacking in dynamics department. Do you take this into account when developing the Expanse?
So, dynamics is one of those things where I have a view on that probably is a little bit contrary to some of the people who make that criticism. In particular, I think that a lot of what people like to call slam or dynamics is actually simply the upper bass, lower mid-range region that gives you the tactile feeling of kick from a kick drum, for example.
Right.
Now, to a certain degree, you can emulate that with EQ. And so, for instance, if you take a headphone that you feel is lacking in punch or slam, you can boost that region up, and you will get a more vibrant feel, and
Right.
you will feel a little bit more of the pressure. That said, most of our headphones are also closed headphones.
Yes,
and
yes.
the thing about closed headphones is you're dealing with a pressure cup on the back side of the driver. And so, all closed headphones, you're having to deal with that stored energy there. And that does provide a degree of resistance. And, you could probably argue that will have some effect on dynamics.
It could become fatiguing as well if it's too dynamic in a closed, right?
Well, no, I don't think that really is
Yeah.
the outcome that you'd experience, but that is a reality that closed headphones will have a different tactile experience to some extent than open headphones do.
Right.
So it's a combination of frequency response and the open versus closed
Right.
technology or design platform. So for people who felt like Stealth didn't have the dynamics that they wanted, 100% of those people who have come by and listened to Expanse
I was gonna
had that experience.
say these actually have some punch to them. I heard this morning,
But they also have an increase in energy in the upper bass and lower mid-range relative to the Stealth.
So the perception could be that's what we're hearing.
So it may be a little bit of both.
Yep.
And was it something I tried to design per se? No.
Right.
The reason that I modified the bass response relative to Stealth was that Stealth was designed to follow the Harman curve pretty closely.
Right.
And one of the things that the Harman curve does that plays very well with a closed headphone is it decreases the upper bass, lower mid-range energy a bit. And that makes the closed headphones sound more open.
Right.
And so all these, when you design a headphone, you're always trading things off. You'll have,
it's always a trade-off.
frequency response, distortion, dynamics, extension,
Right.
self noise, which is another kind of way of thinking about distortion. And you're always picking the trade-offs that you need to make. And so one of the things, for instance, that was very important to me in Stealth was I wanted it to be the most open-sounding closed headphone that people had experienced.
Which it was by far. Yeah.
And so that's what we did, and that was an emphasis in the voicing. With Expanse, we didn't have that issue. This thing sounds so open.
Yeah.
It's just kind of it sounds open like Vocha sounds open.
Right.
But the flip side of it is that because we didn't have to use the tonality to affect the perception of openness,
Right.
That gave us a little more latitude to play with the frequency
Play with that
response.
frequency, yeah.
And I've said this to Dr. Sean Olive, that I felt like the upper bass presentation of the Harman curve isn't acoustically quite as linear as I think the intent or methodology was trying to make it. And there are some different reasons why that might happen. And I'm not saying this is a criticism of the curve, because I actually think that it's really helpful to have the Harman curve.
It's a good starting place, at least, yeah.
But when you understand how they derive it, you can understand why, it's really a statistical assessment of a number of people's responses, and it also has methodologies that can impose certain effects in that region.
Yeah.
And as a result, I felt like it was a couple dB short in that particular area. And then the other area that we made some modifications to is as we got more effective with the Expanse tuning, the absolute high frequency response, if we actually track the Harman curve, as we measure on a gross versus as we listen to sweeps and tones and other things that give us our sense of linearity, we felt that if we actually followed the Harman line too tightly in the high frequencies when the headphone was free of the normal gyrations and ups and downs, that the highs were too high.
Yeah.
And it made female vocals sound shrill and strings sound edgy.
Yep.
And so with Expanse, we ended up slightly increasing the upper bass, lower mids, and with the high frequencies, we made a slight offset so that we could hear what we felt was perceptually more linear. And I think the reason for that is that the AMTS system, which lives here, and you probably can't see it very well, but it's a matrix of honeycomb. When that's introduced, they didn't have that when they're doing the testing to design the Harman curve, and so I think that our implementation can't match the test conditions that the curve was derived from.
That makes total sense.
Or doesn't match it, and so a modification was in order.
And I think I think that was a great answer. And secondly, I think you have to listen to these expanses if you have any concern about that, because what I heard on the listen this morning was definitely action in that area that really gives a perceived sense of a little slam that happens. When I was listening to Enter the Sandman, and those drums came in, I was like, holy, and I'm not going to swear because we're live right now, but I was
well, you're not on cable, so
that's
you're
true.
allowed.
I really can't say. I said, "Holy shit, Justin! These things, man," and I got really excited. And Justin's like, "I know." So I think you gotta hear these, because I think I guess for me, there's gonna be individuals that love the sonic presentation of the Stealth, and that is everything they ever want or will ever want. And then these sound different, and there's gonna be individuals that are gonna want this. Like for me, I love the Stealth. I thought it was fantastic, but the tuning on these is more my flavor on first listen. So so you're going to have options in both areas, which is great, which is what we want. And so I'm really excited for long-term demo with these, because.
And I think for the most part, it's going to be one thing that makes it an easy decision for people is obviously if you want to be traveling or if you're in an environment where you're sensitive to other people being bothered by your sound, even though Expanse doesn't leak much, it does leak. It will still. If you tend to listen on the louder side, other people can hear it. And the other question, of course, is whether you're in an environment where you're bothered by other people's noise.
Yeah.
You might be in an office space where your neighbor is, that person on their cell phone. Yep. Or you may be, wanting to read at home in bed next to your partner or whatever it is, or travel with it. Then, for that instance, the Stealth makes an instantaneously easy choice.
Easy, yeah.
Then, from a tonality perspective, I think probably the majority of people who have listened to both, and we set up a lot of stations where they were both side by side because we knew people were going to be interested. And I think the majority of people would clearly preferred the Stealth, the Expanse overall, but there was also a very clear group of people who preferred Stealth, and they had, their very specific and valid reasons for it. So
everybody's different.
The nice thing is to be able to have choices, and both in terms of
closed and open,
and intonation.
Tuning. Yep, absolutely, I agree. You got Ryan Ho enjoy your tuning philosophy, so he loves what you're doing.
Thank you, Ryan.
Rob Hawk joked about the stuff off of the cheap headphones coming off, which is funny.
The black gunk.
Yeah, exactly. And then Christopher says he loves his Cutis and Mojo too. Very holographic. Yeah, that is something we talked about with Rob. There is something like if you listen to like a traditional Saber DAC or AKM, they may have some width to them, and the imaging may be very precise, but what Chord does is gives you that depth. And with a headphone like the Expanse or the Stealth, wow, and then you really get to feel that sound stage and be present, immersed in it, which is really cool. And
it's fun it's an interesting topic because there are many things we can now measure down to incredible levels, and like we recently invested in an Audio Precision 555B, so we have
a serious piece of equipment.
We've got the gold standard in lab gear, and I've certainly run all our DACs through it because I was curious. And, I can very reliably do blind A/B and pick out when I'm listening to a Chord DAC versus a Saber DAC.
Oh,
and,
100%,
I won't miss it.
Yeah.
It's pretty close to 100% when I've been blind tested.
Yeah.
And yet, when I measure, I can't see the things in the measurements that I feel really describe
tell that
yet.
story. Yeah.
You know, and there are a couple of dramatic things that happen. Like one of the biggest areas where there's an obvious difference with the chord gear is when you look at the high frequency roll off when you approach the sample, you know, the Nyquist sample rate, and you know, a normal fast roll off in a filter kind of goes like this, and the chord kind of goes like that. It's the most vertical I've seen, and you know, I keep wondering what effect that has. But when I look at transient response and intermodulation distortion and other things, I don't see anything that signals to me where that is. And so I just feel like there are places we don't know what to measure yet.
Sure.
You know, and a lot of the basic, I think one thing that a lot of people don't really appreciate is that most of the basic distortion measurements, harmonic distortion, intermodulation distortion, frequency response, impulse response, square waves, these things were all invented before World War I.
Right. Old tech. Very old tech.
Yeah, and you know, there's been a lot of research and perceptual experience of certain aspects of digital audio, for example, a lot around, you know, trying to work and manipulate perception of depth and soundstage, and trying to make sound bars sound like they're, you know,
surround sound
multi-point
units,
sources and with surround sound. You know, and so there's a lot of perceptual stuff there, but there's still some fundamental things that are like, why do amplifiers that have a fairly significant overlap in their distortion profiles, so why do some of them sound similar and some don't? And the same with DACs. You know, why does something with a specific level of synad or frequency response or, you know, impulse response behavior just not sound like something else that in many ways measures very similar?
Right. Great answer. Nick G says, how do metamaterials change to an open format?
Well, the metamaterial itself is the same, but the way the system works is, if you think of it, it's as a two-dimensional structure, three-dimensional structure. In one axis, the material goes like this, and the smaller cells down here handle the higher frequencies, the deeper cells up here handle lower. Then in the other axis, you have multiple cells of identical depth. And so by working on how we configure those cells, we can set how deep the filtration is at a specific frequency, as well as the shape of the filtration or the Q of the filter,
right.
So that we can make things that are both broad and overlapping filters, and we can also make things that handle very high Q features.
Right.
And so it's the same part, but we structure the termination of the waveguides in such a way as to activate certain filters differently.
That's smart. Well, and then you don't have to have two different parts either, which makes sense from a manufacturing standpoint. That's great question. Next question is, we'll take a few more questions, and because Dan's booth has been also one of the most busy, I shouldn't say booth, his room has been one of the most busy rooms this entire weekend, so I got to respect his time, but I know you guys want to hear from the man. I don't blame you. It says, how much money is the Expanse and when is it available? It's available now. It's shipping in pretty much everywhere in North America through, TSAV, we carry them, we're ready to ship them. Dan has them, other dealers have them, and it's the same price as the Stealth, right?
It's also available in parts of the EU now as well.
And now
Germany, I think the Netherlands also received their first shipment. I'm pretty sure both of them already sold out.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, it's going to be one of the fastest selling headphones this year, and it's the same price as itself.
$39.99.
Yeah, $39.99. So, which is also cool. So even though it's the latest and greatest, Dan kept it the same price, which I think speaks to you as the type of manufacturer. You're not just out here to grab money. You're out here to give the community epic technology, great sound, and not everybody's just raising their prices even more. And I think it's kudos to you for not doing that.
We did have, our distributors had to raise the price in the European Union.
Well, sure, because of
the drastic currency.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
Collapse of the euro. But they basically raised the price of somewhere less than that currency rate to that currency rate. So for our friends in the European Union, it's not because anybody was trying to gouge. It was simply because they had no choice. There was no margin left in the product after a 25% currency movement. The other but we have managed to keep all of our prices stable during the pandemic. We focused on operational efficiencies and supply chain stuff, and we've managed to keep our domestic prices flat. One of the things that we did was, because we were facing increased costs on the Stealth and Expanse platform, we made a decision to get rid of the super fancy box and replace it with a nice box. And that was enough of a difference. Literally, people underestimated the cost of fancy packaging.
It's a lot.
It was enough of a difference that we could hold the prices and maintain the margins.
And that, to me, as a consumer and fellow audio lover, I'd rather have the better price and not the fancy box.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the box is really nice when you open it up and you can go ooh ah, and then it goes into a closet where it collects dust, or it gets thrown out where it's just expensive landfill. So figured in the interest of trying to avoid the price increases, we'd go that route.
Rob Hawk complimenting on the gimbal design, the folding designs. One thing he loves about his Eon 2 Noirs and how they fold up. Perp found the price. And then Alex, wow, this guy's picture is always the buffest picture of anybody that comments on our YouTube video. You're swole, dude. Dan, congratulations of your Stealth and Expanse headphones. Finally, some big step in audio, so he's giving you kudos on both of your headphones.
I think we missed a question from Justin up there.
Let me see. Justin Bieber. Oh, yeah, you did. Okay. Or I did. Would you say that adjusting the EQ in the areas you describe adjusting in the Expanse on the Stealth will arrive at a closer sound signature, or will it react differently?
They'll be pretty close. The Expanse will still have a much larger sound stage and, a different feel to it, but because EQ and, again, frequency response is part of the experience. It isn't the experience.
Sure.
But as a tonality, it's fairly straightforward with Stealth. To get Stealth on the Expanse profile, you would have a parametric EQ point of 175 hertz minus 3 dB of a Q of about, I think about between 0.7 and 1. You can experiment.
People are vigorously writing down right now. They're like, let me try this in Rune. Let me see what it does.
And then for the high frequencies, you would actually do the high frequencies are trickier because as a closed back headphone, Stealth will behave differently. So I probably would ignore that and not tamper with that because the EQ point up there won't work. So you can literally, there's just that one EQ point, and you can play around with that and fiddle with the Q to see which gets you closer.
Great question, great answer too. Let me see. Any other questions before we wrap up? Christopher says, yep, we don't listen to the box. So he agrees. Would Hugo 2 be sufficiently? I can take that. Yes, the Hugo 2 sufficiently drives the Stealth. In my review, if you guys watch that, I actually listened to the Stealth quite a bit on the Hugo 2 and was thoroughly impressed, and it drove it with plenty, as did the TT2, but the TT2 is even more powerful. Justin Bieber says, thanks, Dan. This is what people want to know most from me. Thanks for that question, Justin.
Yeah, Justin is one of our San Diego homies, and
oh, sweet.
On the day we announced the headphone, we got this call from Justin. He's like, can I do a will call and pick it up today? So he was like the first guy in the market to get one.
Oh, so Justin, you loving it or what? I'm sure you are. That's awesome. Okay, let me just double check and make sure I didn't miss any other questions, because I don't have my glasses on right now. All right, no, I think we got them all. So, guys, and if there's any gals out there, smash the like button for Dan. This was great. He's always my most favorite person to interview. I mean, he's just personable. He's a fellow burner.
I paid for that.
He's a fellow burner. I mean, he's personable. He's just great. So I always love to, and I get to do it in person. This is fantastic. So stay tuned. I'm hopefully going to go back with a review sample to do some more review and film some sexy B-roll of the Expanse, because this thing is absolutely, excuse the reach, absolutely beautiful. I can't wait to film it and listen to it. You guys gotta listen to this headphone. This is the headphone I am most excited about this year at CanJam. So make sure you take the time to demo it at your local dealer, or if you're in the LA area, we are here till 6 p.m. tonight. You got over 4 hours. Get down here, and if you do make it down here, you can come to the after party tomorrow at the Source AV from 11 to 3. That's a private party, showroom, quiet listening environment. We will have an Expanse for you to listen to with a plethora of amplifiers. I think we got like over 30 amplifiers and DACs in our headphone area. So if you can do that, if you can make it down here, the only way you can go to the private party is to sign up here at CanJam. So that was the agreement we made with CanJam as a partner to do that with them. So don't hesitate. Come down here. Come talk to Dan in his room before he leaves. Come hear these. You will not be disappointed. if you like my preferences. I like these very much. With that, I think that's it for all of us. Thank you, Christopher, for joining us again today, and Christopher thanks us. It's always great to listen to a Dan Clark interview, he says, and I 100% agree.
Well, thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us, Dan. You're always a pleasure, and stay tuned. We will be live streaming probably all the way to 6 o'clock. So keep watching the channel, keep following the HeadFi thread impressions on HeadFi. You'll know when my next interview or whatever it's going to be. I might be talking to fellow CanJammers here in a few minutes on their impressions from today. So stay tuned. Thank you guys all. We appreciate you. Much love, and hope to see you here at CanJam. Cheers.